With antennae quivering and mandibles clicking in excitement, the creature did the only thing he could. He ran. Hindered by the finery draped over him, he gripped tight to a tunic of fine southern cotton and tore the cloth from his body. He gave a soft whistle-like sigh as he uncurled a second pair of smaller arms the human garment wasn't meant to accommodate. Caught halfway between joy and fear, the devil escaped across the soft grass. It was still hours until dawn, and although he could barely see in the darkness, he looked around the field to make sure the others were still running with him. There were a handful of the creatures, running, jumping, and buzzing in their excited flight. They were all of varied bright colors, and every one of their segmented antennae was held high and alert. Many of them had scarred limbs, a few limped and had to be aided by their fellows, and others had cracks and pits in their chitinous skin from old, badly healed wounds. "None of that matters anymore," thought the Black Devil. "We're free." As if to prove his point, he snatched another piece of clothing from his shoulders, a white ermine collar, exposing the gill-like slits along the side of his neck. He took a deep breath through them. He had to smile. His heavy, sideways jaws splayed open wide in coy, waspish pleasure. He had been like a doll to them, even though he towered over the human nobility. Merely hours before, they had laughed at him and his father behind their fans and frilled sleeves for having been dressed in such a mockery of human ways, and in simulated revenge he threw the fur upon the ground and trod upon it as he ran, trilling merrily. A crazed set of clicks suddenly rose up over the night air, and the Black Devil's expression fell. Behind him, he heard a buzzing cry of fear, and then a squeal. Something was wrong. He swiveled his antennae behind and felt them, in a sensation somewhere between taste and smell. Hounds. Those strange, four-legged creatures the humans seemed to love so well were approaching, wild and slobbering. In a panic, his mind raced. Certainly they should not have fled. They should not have tried to rescue their fellows. He thought that his father must have been mad to attempt something so dangerous. However, the Black Devil had also seen the state of the arena pits, blood-soaked sand and all. He had seen the dungeons underneath the castle and the vile projects the Inquisitors were performing on the unlucky ones to find out how the insects worked from the inside out. His father had convinced him, and with the president dead, his father was the only leader they had left. He chanced to glance backward and saw with sudden horror that there were men with torches far away, and that the dogs were merely a vanguard of what was to come. Human voices began to float up over the moonlit scene, and with newfound vigor, the Black Devil turned his face forward and ran. He could hear the rhythmic footsteps of the dogs. He had been confident that his inky chitin would disappear into the black of the deep, crustless night. But the hounds were different. Their bizarre noses could scent at least as well as his own kind. Even if he hid, he could not escape from the steely gray creatures that pursued him. Another devil cried out near him, and he followed the sound with his eyes. A hound had knocked someone to the ground. He saw a tall mouth, dripping with foaming spittle, yellow teeth packed into long, wicked jaws, and eyes empty and shiny. The devil held underneath was buzzing in panic, trying with all four limbs to push the baying creature off. But the creature pushed back, and in a sudden lunge found the devil's neck in his mouth. The Black Devil's eyes widened, refracting the meager light of the moon 100 ways. He had admired these animals once, how humans and their pups worked together in tandem. He realized then, as he saw black blood gush from the victim's breathing gills and heard the choked squeal of a devil in pain, that these animals were more than just pets. Beneath the humans' genteel costumes, pretty words, and perfumed bodies, every last one of them was a baying hound, snapping at the heels of his people, placing them in chains, working them until they died, and killing them in private blood sport. As the victim went limp, the Black Devil was taken off guard by another of the snapping creatures, who barreled into his back, causing him to buzz out in fear. He tried to curl up into a ball, feeling the panic welling in his stomach, but felt teeth on his shoulder. His tough skin protected him, but he could feel the quick underneath squeezed by a horrible pressure. Suddenly the hound above him gave a sharp, surprised bark, and the pressure on his back was relieved. He could hear curses flung at the beast, words in the devil's language more vile than he'd ever heard, causing him to uncurl and turn just in time to see a bright flash of red light. The dog was lying on the ground, freshly kicked, and there was a thin, red beam flowing into it. The creature's form was illuminated, and the devil could smell burning fur and flesh in the glow. In the next instant, its form exploded into fire, illuminating the green fields of the Duchy Novem. After a flare and a screech, only a cloud of dust and sparks showed where the animal used to be. "Run," he heard a familiar voice say. "But run!" He could do nothing but obey. He ran, the image of the hound reduced to dust by one of their weapons burned into his memory. He heard a devil voice buzz out behind him, but he did not dare turn around, lest he slow down and let those terrors fall upon him again. In that moment, the devil did not think. He was a frightened animal, running from the predators of this world. Eventually, the sound of hounds and their masters faded away. He snapped out of his dreamlike horror and saw that the number of companions remaining were fewer than they had been. Only a few of their number had managed to escape. The Black Devil realized someone was missing and stopped running to look around. His fellows were every color, blue, red, green, yellow, but none matched his own black hue. "Father," he said in a near whisper, his eyes widening as he looked back over his shoulder. There was no one else coming. Before the dogs could come again, the Black Devil steeled his expression. He was young, but he was not some sentimental lamb. He turned and resumed his escape, disappearing into the darkness and ruin of the Grey North. This is an audiobook recording of the novel Devil Country by David Hardie. Part 1. The Saint. Chapter 1. "Easy there, Ines. Don't help me. Stop helping me." The man was dressed in a fine velvet doublet of violet and scarlet, piped with gold thread. He was bright blonde and pale as a ghost, even when seasickness had not ravaged him, and his little mustache was thin and groomed. He walked down the ship's plank, legs wobbling after such a voyage. He stumbled once, tried desperately to make it appear on purpose, and leaned against the rope railing, trying not to topple into the sea. "Up you get, Ines," said the sailor, hired to act as his steward, removing a toothpick from the corner of his mouth. "Got to be respectable for them fancy escorts." "I can do it myself, commoner." The man with the mustache pulled himself to his feet by the ropes and walked down the plank, gripping the knotted hemp like a vice as he continued. "Got to give subjects of my betrothed a show of dignity, eh?" His feet touched solid ground. He let go of the rope. "See? There's nothing so relaxing as a long voyage by sea. The only thing better is—" Before he could finish, he paused, and then wordlessly turned around and retched over the edge of the dock, flinging his late breakfast into the sea. The sailor struggled to keep his smile bright. "When it ends," the noble finished, his stomach empty and his legs shaking. There, boss. That should be it. Did anybody see that?" "Only the boys, and believe me, these sorts have seen worse." The voice of a young man climbing the rigging called down a quick, "Not by much!" causing a chorus of laughter to filter down to the docks. Before the prince's anger could do any damage, his steward quickly spread his arms out over the view, showing his aristocratic charge the sights of the town. "Prince Heinrich van Nottendam, welcome to the port of Greyville." The prince looked around the town in disdain, unimpressed with the wood and thatch cottages just beyond the port. He knew of Greyville as a city that had been won and lost many times over its long history, often subject to attacks by invading armies and pirates along its rotting quays. And the quality of the buildings showed it. Despite its less than ideal looks, he knew it was the largest seaport in the Duchy Novem. But the people built their houses cheaply and were slow to feel the benefits of the Duke's boom and prosperity. To the south, he saw a semi-permanent military encampment which bordered a huge fenced tent city where the devils were corralled when they were not in use. The most impressive feature of the town was in the center, where there was a tall, boxy skeleton of some ancient building of gray steel. It had half collapsed long ago, and the town had grown up around it. In Heinrich's opinion, the whole thing paled in comparison to the grand architecture of the Nottendane capital. Even the ruin was nothing special to him, as the lonely steel cage was a trifle compared to the lavish ruins and haunted necropolises that dotted the Nottendanish countryside from the old bad times before history. His eyes softened as he thought of the palace, his warm bed, and the lavish royal feasts to which he was accustomed. Still, he put on a brave face, and as he did, the sailor patted the prince on the back in a gesture of goodwill. The prince changed in an instant, his eyes wide and his teeth bared. "You bloody ingrate! Were you raised by wolves? Take your hands off me!" "1,000 pardons. I have a terrible habit of being friendly," said the sailor, jerking his hand away as if he had been bitten. "I promise it won't happen again." "I should think not. Get out of here," demanded the prince, "before I get really angry." "Go on, then." The sailor's smile weakened by only the slimmest of degrees, before he bowed and walked back up the plank to help finish tying up the ship's rigging. Prince Heinrich van Nottendam would have followed him back up to the ship to demand a more satisfactory apology, but the idea of climbing aboard that nauseating contraption stopped him cold. Instead, he turned and crossed his arms, waiting for his escort to arrive. To the south of the docks, in a collection of filthy tents surrounded on all sides by garrisoned military, there lived the devils. Bequeathed to the Duke Novem by the King of Crossland, the devils were kept there under control until their services were needed. The camp served as both a breeding ground and training barracks for these creatures, who were then rented out as slaves and mercenaries across the countryside, or past the channel in the kingdom of Nottendam. Each devil lived alone, or in pairs. Children were rare. In a small tent assigned to them by the foreman of the camp, 2 devils relaxed in silence. The older of the 2 sat in comfort on the floor, looking down at his son with kind eyes. His chitinous shell was a verdant green, over which he wore a quilted cloth robe, fashioned from found strips of rags thrown away by the humans of Greyville. It covered his shoulders and the top portions of his chest, but had 2 patches exposed at his belly, where an extra set of arms grew, ending in thin, dexterous hands with 3 fingers each. Tied loosely around his neck was a cloak sewn together from yellowing linen sheets he had found, meant to protect him from the damp, crustless climate. He was tall, even sitting, but his back hunched and his twin antennae bowed low so they did not taste the ceiling of his tent. The older devil closed his eyes slowly and gave a meaningless chatter of annoyance. His hefty mouth parts clicked together, and his antennae twitched, scanning the room, as he struggled to find the words to say. On the ground, a sword rested, and both devils refused to acknowledge its presence. "Little one," he said to the younger devil sitting by, drawing in the dirt floor with a stick, "it's almost time for me to go. Our neighbors will take care of your needs while I'm away. His egg hatched early. He will need help raising the larva." The shorter devil was the same color as his father, and wore short pants and a rag tunic. He was nearly grown, but was still shorter than his father, with twitching antennae and wide eyes he still needed to grow into. Like most young devils, his face was fuzzy, like the skin of a peach. The older devil stroked the youth's face before him, and the boy's mandibles clicked lightly in annoyance. "Might I come along?" "No," was the parent's reply. "You must stay. You haven't learned the sword well enough." "I know enough. The master-at-arms says I'm the quickest learner in the camp. He says I would be wasted picking vegetables in a field somewhere." "Knowing how to use a sword is nothing to be proud of," he said, placing his hands gently on the young devil's shoulders. "You mustn't call undue attention to yourself. They will only work you harder if you show off. You understand?" "But—" "In any case, it will be a very boring mission, and they won't allow children in the procession to Castle Novem. At least no children of ours." "I'm nearly grown. See, I grew a whole inch from last time," said the boy, standing up on his toes to make himself look taller and letting his head scrape the low ceiling of the tent. "I'm sorry, little one, but no," he said, as he tied a frayed piece of rope around his waist as a sword belt. The devil then reached up to one of the two small pendants hanging from a flap of cloth sewn to the inside of the tent. One of them held a little piece of wood inscribed with a shoddily written name, Oliver. The other was a small copper trinket hung by a cheap chain, with a picture of one of the human's beloved saints, a pious-looking man riding in a chariot, with a script underneath him which read, Saint Leonard. The older devil took down the copper and hung it around his neck. "I'll miss you terribly, Father. Can you tell me something, before you go, about the stars?" "I must be going. I'll be late." "The ship you said we used to sail down from the sky, it's still up there, yes?" "Little one." "Please? It's still up there, isn't it?" The older devil lowered his antenna in a whistling sigh before he looked softly upon his son, placing a hand upon the boy's fuzz. "Yes, little one. It's still there in orbit." "Are there any of our people still on it?" "Maybe. But it's been a long time. There wasn't very much food left up there even 30 years ago." "There's food on the planet, though. Can't we go back up there someday?" asked the boy, his eyes lighting up. "If it still flies, we could use it to leave." Leonard's antenna drooped for a moment, but he tried to force them up to maintain a facade of good humor. Oliver saw through this easily, and his own expression cooled. "Never mind." "Anyway," said Oliver, intending to stall his father for as long as possible, "teach me a lesson before you go." "A lesson? We've already had your lessons today." "I like lessons," he said. "We didn't do our writing today. I can spell something. I learned a word from the others during training, and I figured out how to spell it all on my own." Oliver instantly fell to his knees, taking up the stick he was using to draw before in his dexterous right hand that extended from his belly. He steadied himself upon the floor with his two meaty upper arms, and with his lower left hand he began to rub his stomach idly in thought. Then, with an upturn of his antenna and a widening of his mandibles, Oliver began to scratch out lines into the dirt floor of their tent. Leonard's eyes softened. His son was his pride, the only good thing this planet had ever given him. He leaned forward to watch as his son scratched out the symbols on the dirt floor. Leonard then peered up and around as his son wrote, painfully aware that writing in their own language was forbidden. But it was only a patch of dirt, and no one would know. Soon enough, the boy had finished, and showed his father his work. "There," said Oliver. "Did I spell it right?" Leonard's smile faded quickly, and his eyes went wide. With antenna twitching, he fell to his knees, and with lower hands began to brush away the lines in the dirt, as his son complained loudly. "Father!" "Who taught you that word?" demanded Leonard, reaching forward and snatching the stick away from his son. "Who? Tell me!" "It was just one of the others at training. His father said something about a president." "Don't say it out loud, little one," said Leonard, grasping his son by the shoulders. "That word is dangerous. If a human heard you say it—"
"But what does it mean? My friend said it was like a king. But for us—"
"We have no king, little one," he insisted, tossing the stick away and embracing his son. "And we have no one like that either. The humans forbid it."
"But—"
"No. Do not argue. Promise me you won't say that word again. Leonard said, nearly yelling at his son as he squeezed the boy tighter. "Promise me!"
I promise."
Oliver was frightened by his father's sudden outburst, and Leonard could not help but feel ashamed for yelling at his child. He released his son and stroked the fuzz on the boy's face, cooing lightly to let the boy know everything was all right. "I'm not angry with you, little one. Just frightened. If anyone heard you say that, they might take you away from me."
"I understand,"
the young devil said, although his face betrayed that he understood nothing and yearned to ask more. Recognizing that look, and knowing that the boy's curiosity would not be sated here, Leonard whistled a sigh. He stood quickly and peeked out of the tent flaps. When he saw no one around, he tied them closed, before he sat back down and bade his son come closer. Oliver, sensing the grave nature of his father's behavior, minded his father's direction and came close. Leonard gently took hold of the boy's shoulder, and soon the two of them were face to face, close enough that Leonard could whisper to his son. "The president," said Leonard, "was our leader when we first landed."
"You mean from the ship that sails the stars?"
"Yes. Long before you were born, maybe 30 years past, when I was your age, the president was aboard that ship. He spoke to the Duke on our behalf."
"Then what happened to him?"
He is dead now. The humans say he betrayed us to the Duke, and now we are forbidden from talking about him."
"Oh,"
said Oliver, before he lowered his voice even further, speaking in no more than a whisper.
"But is that the truth? Or is it another lie, like the curtain of the stars?"
"Curtain of stars? What is that?"
"It's a thing human teachers tell human children. They say that the stars move as one, like a curtain around the planet. But you taught me that the stars are all like the sun, with their own planets and everything, but just so far away that we can only see their light at night, and they seem to move because the planet spins."
"When would you be able to hear what a teacher has to say?"
"Well,"
began Oliver, trying to think of an excuse. "You went skulking around the town."
"No, the schoolhouse in the city is so easy to sneak into, Father. There's no chance I could be caught."
"I told you to stay out of the human neighborhoods, little one. You should stay in the camp or near the docks where we're allowed."
"But there are so many places to go, and you're away for days at a time. I swear the humans never catch me,"
cried Oliver, before he remembered he had not had an answer to his question.
"What about the star curtain? Why do they teach their children something different than what you taught me?"
"The humans are wrong, little one. They just don't know it yet," Leonard said, before remembering the late hour and stepping away from his son. "Now, be good. Stay in the camp. I must leave now, or I will be late." Urgently, Leonard picked up his sword and placed it into his improvised belt. He walked past his son, giving him one last tender touch, and started out of the tent, holding open the flap for just a moment as he looked back towards Oliver. With nothing else to do, the little one waved goodbye frantically in a movement learned from humans, and Leonard's antennae raised up high and his mandibles went wide in an alien smile before he turned away and down the road towards the procession which would wait no longer. Oliver looked up once his father was gone. He was not stupid. Every few weeks they would take his father and any other healthy devil to work the fields or stand around wearing swords and looking imposing. It could be weeks, months, or sometimes years before a devil returned. They usually came back, but not always, and sometimes men in fancy gold-lined clothes would choose the youngest and fittest to ride away to the Castle Novem in an iron cart, and they were never heard from again. Oliver didn't remember much about his other parent, his sire. His sire had been taken to a far-away war when Oliver was barely old enough to remember him. Whenever he asked, Leonard would only sigh, smile, and say that he might come back yet. It had been 10 years. Oliver knew better. Oliver thought that perhaps the two devils who hatched him didn't really love one another, at least not the way two people should properly be in love. When breeding rights were awarded in the camp, the arranged pairings were often ill thought out, but they were still his parents. His sire was gone, and he knew that any moment the last family he had left might disappear forever into some human war, never to return, or Oliver might be chosen to ride the iron cart. He followed the woodcut pendant displaying his human-given name with his eyes, watching it sway from side to side, and decided what he was going to do. Afternoon at the docks was one of the busiest times of the day. Between the hours of 12 and 4, the human element of Greyville cleared away from the boardwalk markets, and for 4 precious hours, the devils owned the docks. Naturally, there were guards all around, many humans in full plate, as well as other devils given work standing and keeping the peace among their fellows. Heinrich was disgusted as he watched, looking around for any kind of escort. He stood as near to the human guards as he could, watching as the devils queued up in front of a fish stall and one by one turned in some kind of token. Each was given a bag of rotted guts in exchange. The smell of butchered fish pervaded the prince's senses, and he could not help but sniff and cover his nose with a handkerchief when he saw a few devils dare to sit down on the dockside, dangling their legs into the water as they proceeded to shovel raw fish guts into their horrendous mouthparts. "Appalling," muttered Prince Heinrich. "Simply appalling. My father will hear of this." "Your Highness, Prince Heinrich." The voice had come from a man in full plate armor, carrying a banner bearing the family crest of the Novem family. In the presence of this man, a knight of Duke Novem by the look of him, the devils shrank away. "Finally!" cried Heinrich. "I've been waiting for 2 whole minutes. 2 whole minutes among this disgusting sight. The Duke should be ashamed he has let his town be taken over by these creatures." "I apologize for the sight, Prince Heinrich. We did not expect you until tomorrow. We would have cleared away the docks to spare you the sight of the insects feeding. This is not a fair view of what our country has to offer." "Never mind," the prince cried. Just lead me to my carriage." "Aye, your highness. This way." The knight bowed and turned, leading the way for the prince to follow. The prince, keeping up his air of dignity, allowed himself to be led to his carriage, and inspected it with some polite disdain. Gold and exquisitely carved oak lined the seams of the carriage. It was hitched to 2 horses, proud and white, and alongside the horses 2 devil escorts stood at attention. Leonard stood on the left, his pendant to St. Leonard glinting in the sunlight, and another one by the name of Paul, judging by the name on the woodcut sign around his neck, mirrored him on the right. Behind the carriage was a separate cart of much simpler design and modestly pulled by an aged brown horse. It was being loaded with the luggage of the Nottingdenish noble, and was surrounded on either side by 2 armoured knights on horseback. One was carrying the Van Nottingham standard, and the other carried a banner denoting the Novem family, the family of his bride-to-be. Heinrich sniffed once again and nodded. It would do. He climbed into the golden carriage quickly, sparing barely a look at the 2 devils in his procession. A familiar horn blared at the head of the train, announcing the arrival of nobility. Slower than Heinrich really liked, his entourage began to move, and soon they made their way from the docks to the tall gates of the city of Greyville. Prince Heinrich was alone within the cab of the carriage, and it took no time at all for the man to grow bored of the unfamiliar countryside rolling past his window. The sight of it caused his mustache to bristle. It rolled in gentle green waves all around him, except far away to the southwest, where he could sometimes see lopsided square structures silhouetted against the gray skies. He sneered anew whenever he saw those ghostly buildings. Just another cursed necropolis, monuments to the dead society of the saints of long ago, and utterly dull compared to the sights of Nottingham. Dissatisfied with the sights, He pounded a knuckle lightly on the roof of the carriage before calling up. "How far, driver?" "Should be merely a day's ride to the castle, your highness." "It would be less if not having such a train with us. Shouldn't we go faster if we leave some dead weight behind?" said Prince Heinrich, as he stared out his window at the devil who marched before his carriage. He covered his nose with his sleeve, although he could smell nothing. "Oh, no, sir, I wouldn't dream of it. No highwayman worth his salt will attack us with two of the devils in tow, especially old St. Leonard here. Whether he meant to or not, the Duke gave you a boon in renting us him free of charge for the trip." Heinrich peered out again at the devil, who paid no mind to the humans talking about him. "Is he skilled?" "Why not ask him yourself?" "Talk? With one of the creatures?" "You know the language, I trust. It's a bit hard to navigate the clicks and all, but I figure a man of your military background—" "Of course I understand the language, you bloody fool!" cried the prince. And just to prove a point, he called out the window to the green-shelled devil. "You, devil, come here." Leonard slowed until his pace matched the high window of the carriage. He looked up, careful to keep his antenna low and servile. "Yes, my lord," the devil clicked. Heinrich couldn't help but cringe at the sound. He knew devils could not speak human tongues, and it galled him to have to learn to understand the devil's trills and whistles by dint of his military background working with them. He often wondered if he was missing every other word, and the devils were disrespecting him to his face. He knew sometimes the devils talked to one another by sending out odd smells with their words, but it was beyond him to bother learning to parse that. The prince leaned forward to espy his name, and found the religious talisman hanging from the devil's neck. He read, "Saint Leonard." "Yes, my lord." "A bit ostentatious naming yourself for a saint." "I was named by my first foreman. He could not write, so he passed out these pendants instead." The driver spoke up. "Leonard should be a lucky charm on a journey such as this, Highness. He's a saint of travellers, after all." Heinrich forged ahead, ignoring this comment. "And the driver says you are skilled?" "Only slightly, my lord. Enough to get by." "What campaigns have you served?" "Are you interested in military maneuvers, my lord?" Prince Heinrich snorted. "I invented a few in my defense of the Nottingdanish crown. I ask again, in what campaigns have you served?" "I had a long tour in the Far East, fighting a crusade." "How ironic, to have devils fight for the saints above. And what was the result?" Leonard hesitated. "My people were the only survivors of the campaign." "The devils? How did you get back without someone to order you?" "We wandered back, retraced our steps back across the countryside west, until we could gain passage on a voyage to the port at Greyville." "Like messenger pigeons, eh? Always find your way back home. Must be the beast within you. I shall remember this." The prince taunted, smiling wickedly at the devil. "Not so lucky, though, are you? Got your commanders killed, didn't you?" "Yes, my lord." "You'll be a jinx to us all. I should leave you behind. Send you back." "If you like, my lord." This was not the answer he expected. "You'll obviously disrupt the smooth passage of this procession if you stay with us." "Yes, my lord." "Stop agreeing with me, you bloody insect."
Yes, my lord. I'll try."
"Oh, bloody hell. Drive up," he called around. "Does this one have any spawn?"
"Aye, sir. He earned breeding rights when he came back alive. The kid should be a couple of years away from manhood by now, I reckon."
He turned back to Leonard and cried, "Now, you had better be all the driver says you are, or I shall personally see to your destruction and the destruction of your child. Understand?" The devil gave a pause and answered slowly, "Yes." "Good. Now off you get. Go back to marching." The devil began to march faster until he had reached his place beside the horses, adjacent to his peer, Paul. The other devil showed sympathy towards Leonard. Leonard, however, made the slightest twitch of his antenna, and Paul took the hint. paying attention to the road ahead of him. The driver pushed his hat up his head and whistled.
Sure showed him, didn't you, sir?
I did. To keep order, one must take discipline into one's own hands.
Best take care. I said he's a good sword arm, but I didn't mention he's part of the original batch landed here 30 years back. Older than he looks, and sharp too, for a devil. The reason he's survived so long.
My good man, even the smartest of the insects cannot begin to compare with the raw human intellect.
It was then, as the prince smiled to himself, that the world exploded in a bright flash of lightning.